Welcome everybody. I'm sorry if you had been waiting, but we think we have everything in order now, and we're very happy to have you with us here for our very first mortgage servicing hotline call. We hope there'll be lots more. My name is Patricia Taylor, Pat Taylor, and I'm joined today by Brian Turner, who's over there on the left-hand side of your screen, and our resident technologist, who's Moyen from Vertex. And we want to make sure that today, excuse me, as we're streaming across the East Coast, we're going to be discussing homeowner-centric escrow management. And, you know, this is such a critical part for many of you and for your customers. So as always, this is your hotline, and we really want to make sure that you're encouraged to submit questions, and we'll get to them in just a minute. Brian is just going to introduce Moyen and Io from Vertex, and just we'll get started.
So before we get started, Moyen, would you be able to speak a bit about what Vertex is and how the mortgage servicing hotline came to evolve into this first podcast?
Sure, of course. So at Vertex, we're a software partner looking to elevate the servicing experience across mortgages, home equity, and HELOCs. And just to be clear, this hotline is for all servicers, regardless of what system or platform you use. But it's a place for us to connect and exchange what's really top of mind for us right now. And our goal is simple. We want you to discover new ideas and find solutions to the pains that you're feeling every day. We partner with our own customers to solve problems we discuss here, but if you're using another vendor, that's totally okay. We just hope that you can take the pains and solutions we talked about today and use them to start a conversation internally at your institution or with us about how we can make plans to solve those problems and better improve your operations. And so for that reason, we're very fortunate to have mortgage servicing experts like you, Brian, and Pat on the team who provide deep expertise that allows us to combine technology and strategic and operational expertise to truly partner with you all across all phases of servicing.
So to keep in mind, if you would like to submit a question, you can do so via the chat box, and we will give live answers to those questions. Today, I think we're going to start with a brief dive into the management of escrow analysis in a way that really empowers and informs homeowners. Then we'll get right into the questions that have been submitted. How about you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. You know, folks, it's really important. We do have a kind of a quick disclaimer for you. Today's advice is general. We try to do it generally in nature. And if you need specific help on something in particular, you are most welcome to get that specific question or the context of it to us. So just please directly contact us. You can do that, and we'll have all of that information for you at the end. So we'll just reinforce so you can give us an opportunity to send us a message. Contact us at it's connect, CONNECT, at Vertex, and it's VERTYX.io. And we'll look to provide much more specific guidance when we know what it is that's keeping you up at night. Really, that's really important. So, Brian, how about we get diving in on it?
Sure. So, Pat, when it comes to the concept, homeowner-centric escrow management, what first comes to mind for you?
Well, you know, for us, and Brian, you know this from the phone calls that we get in, and this is a general comment, folks, in terms of what Brian and I have experienced, which is that this whole concept of a homeowner-centric escrow management, and what comes first to my mind is really about helping that homeowner to become educated. How can we, as mortgage servicers, help people to understand the issues that they're having? We can help them to resolve, but we have to hear from them. We have to talk to them. And it's so important right now because I'm sure most of you are seeing a lot of AI, and you are also finding that some of your companies do not have the perhaps as sophisticated a customer care area as we'd like to see involved in every organization, simply because sometimes people are afraid to call in and not be able to talk to somebody. I'm sure you're seeing that in your own lives in terms of that. So that first concept is really about helping homeowners to understand what's going on in the world right now that is impacting their escrows, and how can we help those folks to understand that purpose. So what is actually paid out, and why might my payment, if many of you have ever talked to a person who said, I had a fixed rate mortgage and I don't understand why that fixed rate mortgage, why my payment's different this month than it was, a year ago. And of course, it takes a person who takes the time to help them to understand that it's probably the tax and the insurance part that has changed, not their payment for principal and interest. And that's so important. And we want to talk with you and hear from you in terms of what some of you are doing about fixing this. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Pat, with the homeowners education. I think a large part of as a servicer, I always had to try to time when I did the escrow analysis. And then you always get the questions from the borrowers when they get the escrow analysis, what's actually going on, because they're confused. They don't understand how to materialize that, what a deficiency is, what a surplus is, what a shortage is, those kind of things. So I think you're right on.
Can we explain to them for just a minute that escrow analysis that we're talking about typically gets done, sort of once a year, and so that analysis goes out to the borrower. It is responsible for a servicing operation to do that, and it usually goes out to help people understand if their payment is going to change, how it's going to change. But we recognize, especially from a technology perspective, because while Brian and I are very much operationally focused, the other two folks on the phone with us, Io, who's being very quiet and making sure that the technology is working, and Moyen, who's smiling at you right now, it's our responsibility to help you to understand that, if you have the right tools. And, it's really important to understand that the right tools not only are heavily impacted by making sure that your technology is working properly and that the information is understandable for that person that you're talking to. But sometimes it's very hard for people to understand, why did it go up significantly, or why did it go up a very, very small amount. The point of the matter is that if you have the right tools in place, and even if those tools are already in place, but maybe not being used effectively to make sure that we're able to very efficiently and effectively get that message out to our borrowers, that's the part we want to talk a little bit more about today. Okay?
Yeah, a key
Moyen,
part.
what do you think?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so simply put, I think there's a lot that we can do to make that process easier. And so let me paint a picture of what is possible with technology that exists today. So yes, for some servicers, this is your reality today, but then for others, it could be something that gets the ball rolling in terms of ideas. But simply put, you should be able to pick up your phone and have the already impacted homeowner on the phone ready to have that conversation about changes in escrow payment. And at your fingertips at the same time, you should have a detailed breakdown of changes across property tax, installments, insurance premiums, and any surprises that maybe weren't accounted for in the prior escrow analysis window.
That sounds amazing. I can definitely see the picture, but what would it take behind the scenes?
Got it. And so to start, you need to have access to the right and timely data. So we can always go into more details about how to access the right data, but it's largely through companies that specialize in finding and updating this information. And so the goal of that is to remove that burden off of your internal staff. Then you need to have the right servicing platform that is properly configured to take in this data and allows you to run side effect-free escrow analysis. So what that essentially means is, can you actually go through the process without having to send external communications? And lastly, and probably not as frequently found, you need an efficient way to both identify and contact affected homeowners. So for example, if you're in the process of going through each homeowner in a generated list, we certainly need people to talk. And so the process of identifying and dialing should be entirely automated. So we should be able to say, hey, here are the changes, here are the ones to really focus in on. So that way that will free up time for you to actually talk with homeowners who are available and impacted. And beyond the operational efficiency, we're actually seeing something really interesting where servicers are using this as an opportunity to really partner with their homeowners. First, there's some really exciting resources where homeowners can actually contest their property tax assessments. And it's a really powerful way to say to the borrower, like, hey, like we're on your side and we want to help you save money. So here's some resources to help you make sure that you're paying the right amount for property tax. Secondly, we're seeing a rise in embedded insurance shopping. And so essentially, if the servicer can offer a lower hazard rate insurance through a partner, and they present that option to you as the homeowner, it turns that painful escrow payment increase to a potential savings opportunity. And it also builds trust where it shows like, hey, we're on your side yet again, trying to help you get the best value for your dollars. And lastly, on the education front, it's no longer just about static letters anymore. We're seeing several lenders actually send personalized interactive videos walking the homeowner through each and every single step of their specific escrow analysis statement.
Wow, what a great tip, Moyen. And it's difficult, folks, if you think about the fact, even as just a homeowner yourself, that you get this letter in the mail and it doesn't often come with a lot of additional information. It just says, here's how it is, folks. This is what the new payment is going to be as a result of the insurance going up. And while you may have had, or your client may have had, the opportunity to choose their own insurance company, and they may have some other information relative to how they want to handle their insurance or possibly change providers. In terms of private mortgage insurance, if one of your borrowers has private mortgage insurance, that was probably ordered by you as the lender. And so they wouldn't have an awful lot of control over that. They would, however, have a lot of opportunity to be able to talk to their taxing authority if they had a question. But that information is really important to understand, that kind of important information comes into the servicing platform, if you will, that you're using. It should, in order to be able to make sure that ahead of time, people are able to understand what the changes are. But as Moyen said, talking to a live person who you can ask questions to makes all the difference in the world. Brian, what do you think about that from an operational perspective?
Yeah, I also agree, Pat. I think it's all about having the right automation and integrations in place to free up time for the people to truly connect with our customers. It just frees up a ton of time and resources. Improving the escrow management experience for homeowners it's not really about removing people or throwing AI at random processes. Running a truly homeowner-centric escrow management service is all about giving the servicers the time and resource leverage to connect early and go deep into the specific instance with the borrower.
Absolutely. And are you finding in some of the folks that I have worked with, what I'm finding is that they are beginning to understand that incoming call sometimes, instead of being answered by a machine, that if somebody is identified as someone who needs to speak to a tax authority within the servicing operation, mechanically, technologically, we have the capability as an industry to be able to do that and to help people in the customer care area when they are calling in for something rather specific. You all know, I'm sure, those of you who obviously are working in the servicing operations across our East Coast at this time, that right now, nothing is more frustrating than being able to wait online to talk to someone who is busy paying taxes in the back office. The reality is having an opportunity for an expert that they can speak to, or at least take their question and get it answered for them and call them back is such a huge opportunity. And that's particularly what Brian and Io and Moyen and I are sort of on about as far as the technology that we get to work with every day. It's about that personal interaction that is important, especially if you're a bank, right? With a bank customer who considers themselves, that bank customer, and they have their other accounts there. Educating people. If you're a credit union, for example, it's another perfect example. If you have a member who is actually part of that institution, and so making sure that they are getting that kind of care, really important, really important. And we can help you with ways to do that and think about ways to be able to, to using your own technology right now or using some of the newer technologies. It's really important for us to talk about those kinds of things and answer your questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Moyen.
All right, great. And so as always, if you would like more detail on any concept we just talked about, send your questions in the chat and we'll get into them in addition to the pre-submitted questions we've already received.
Okay.
All right,
Well, let's
go ahead, Moyen.
Brian.
Okay, so let's dive into the question bank. It says question 1. I get hazard insurance information for various locations, emails, calls, mail from both borrowers and insurance companies. It's overwhelming for staff to keep track all of the information and deadlines. Is there a particular process that helps organize this better?
Great question. In that earlier segment, where we were talking about data and third-party providers, that similar concept would really apply here, I think, Brian. And managing, for example, the hazard insurance, because, as you said in your question, and I don't know if that was Blake that asked that question, but Blake, if it was, you said, you get hazard insurance from so many different locations and probably at different times from both borrowers and insurance companies. It is overwhelming for the staff to keep track of all of that information and the deadlines. And so it's really important, and we'd love to understand what kind of institution you're working with, Blake. But is there a particular process that helps us to organize it better? And before we talk about that, could you help us to understand, are you an independent mortgage banking firm? Are you a bank? Or tell us what kind of platform you're working on.
And the question, I think, was submitted by another individual experiencing that issue. And so we might not have the exact context, but I think what Brian might be able to provide some perspectives on that vendor side.
Sure.
Okay.
Brian?
Yeah, if you would like to know, more about working potential vendors who provide insurance tracking service, you can email us at connect@vertex.io and we'll follow up with specific perspective based on your specific case. And I think we all know this. I think that from being in servicing for as many years as Pat and I have been in servicing, one of the biggest time resource issues that you have is insurance tracking. The amount of time that a full-time employee spends opening the mail, looking through it, how much of it's duplicated, this kind of thing. It's very, very impactful when their time can be better utilized doing something else. And that's why we are really adamant about pushing the automation portion to automate with the vendors.
Sure.
And don't you also feel, Brian, that what has happened to us, especially as it relates to the insurance piece, that the person asking the question is asking, is because that part of the operation is in the hands of the borrower. They have the right to choose their insurance provider. But it is critical to understand that our systems, most of the servicing systems, and you can count them the big ones, folks, on, on one hand, are, as Brian said, have that ability to be able to aggregate that information, make sure that the information of when that is likely to change is, and what the current interest payment, or I'm sorry, insurance payment should be in your systems. And people who would be asked those questions would have the opportunity then to speak to the person. Not only that, but ability to be able to help them to understand when that particular insurance policy is coming to a point where it might change, if they were thinking about changing companies, for example. And so, Brian, I think you're absolutely right that most of our really fine systems have that aggregated, and if people were educated just in terms of where to go look for it, they would have a much better opportunity to speak to someone and perhaps resolve that for them, because it's a concern. Moyen?
Yeah, and I think, as you all have mentioned, like, a key part of this is making sure that the underlying servicing system is able to actually read in that provided data, and then to, like, remove that manual upload download process. So that way you can actually focus on the questions of, okay, now that I have these latest premiums and expiration dates, what do I need to do now?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty amazing. We have a second question here, Moyen, if you'd like. It says, it is almost the end of the year, and it seems like I'm always struggling with the combination of monthly, quarterly, and annual reporting. Should it take this long to manage all of this reporting? Is there a better way to do reporting, both as a servicer and also interesting as an investor? And that's so critical, isn't it? In terms of, Brian, I know we deal with a situation a little differently when, it's an independent mortgage banking firm, and that information is generally coming right into the system. And so hopefully a customer care person or a person who's knowledgeable could help them. But when you're also the investor, like you might be in a bank or in a credit union, you have any thoughts on that one, in terms of the systems that they're using that brings that in?
Yeah, I think that, all the systems, Pat, as well as I do, that we've seen so many different systems, and they all relatively do it the same way, but yet it's a different process in the end, right? So
exactly.
It produces the same information, but to get to that can sometimes be challenging. And I think that, from my perspective, there's, we always go through that, especially when you get to like the 1098s and those kind of things. And then you have, a payment was missed and that kind of thing. So then you have to readjust and go back and reissue those, and then submitting the fire files to the IRS and those kind of things. So, I mean, it's I think it's the more you can automate, the better. It makes life so much easier, and you can focus your time on your borrower experience, right? That's ultimately the number one thing that we're all after, is having the best borrower experience.
Yeah. And I think that right now, in this time, and as Brian said, you can tell from my gray hair and Brian's maybe little gray hair, the important thing, folks, is that, the same people who are back in the back offices doing that reporting, sometimes on a quarterly basis, sometimes on an annual basis, depending upon your business model. But if you're reporting, for example, to the GSEs, it really is important that that borrower understand what is happening, so that when they get the letter from you, I mean, what we're trying to stress today, I think, is that good systems have that information available. But when you have perhaps a very small staff, you have to be very careful about the people who are doing the actual investor reporting, and maybe think of that borrower, because in some cases they may be part of being an investor. They may be part of a credit union, and they're very interested in how the other members of a credit union, for example, are being kept up to speed with how that those taxes and insurance payments are being made timely, and that the information is available to them to help them to understand the health and wellness of the organization where they have that big responsibility for their mortgage. So just a thought. Moyen, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to that like annual, quarterly, monthly
Yeah.
reporting, I think a lot of the times the system should be able to generate a lot of that raw information and input.
Yes.
So that way, instead of running all these complex queries and pulling in 15 different reports into one place, ideally it should be at a point where you can just say, hey, here's the data. Can I review this in the context of my operations? And then from there, submit it to the reporting authorities. And so from my perspective, if that isn't your reality where you're able to say, hey, can I just do more of a review process and less of a report generation, we should definitely
Yeah.
connect and talk about, what you're currently doing, what data sources you're looking at, and how to streamline that operation.
Well, it's changed a lot, hasn't it, too, Moyen? As the years have gone by, we've gotten smarter about understanding that sort of back office operation is available. And if you have the right people and the right staff to be able to do that investor reporting, they are not the same people necessarily who are talking to the person on the phone. But that information has to be readily available to the point that the person here asked the question. It's got to be. We can't do both necessarily, but we need the information in order to be able to be effective with that borrower. And I think that's a great point you make. It isn't the same as it was years ago. We can get that information. We just should be able to ask for it. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Well, do we have another? Question that we want to get into right now, or do we have any questions from a person who's out there on our hotline? Anybody?
And I think if not, or while people are digesting what we sent across, I think we can get into the other submitted question where
Yes.
it's essentially with the ending of the FHA COVID modification options, borrowers are requesting modifications and they're upset that it's no longer an easy process compared to the past. And a lot of information is requested. So two-part question: how are other servicers informing the borrower about this more complex process without upsetting them? And then two, what can we do as a credit union to still help homeowners in need?
Brian, do you want to take that?
Pat, you are much more passionate about this topic. I think going back to the School of Mortgage Servicing not so long ago, that this has been a high priority, and I know you love talking about this, so I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, no, it's such an important, it really is such an important question. Folks, without, getting into a whole lot of detail, I think it's important for you to understand that most of our really amazing programs that we had that allowed us to do those modifications primarily based on what that customer's relationship was with the institution. Have they made their payments on time? Is this something where their pattern changed dramatically? And now that person may have something that's an underlying cause. And unfortunately, on September 30th, some of you may not know this, on September 30th of 2025, most of those programs that we had in place where we could make up our own minds about a modification, we could offer that modification based on what we felt that borrowers' needs were. And we had a lot of support, but things have changed, unfortunately. And may I just explain that part of that had to do with the fact that the banks had experienced, in some cases, people who were in forbearance plans for as long as 18 months. And so I want you to think about the fact that if someone was in, and maybe some of your customers were in a forbearance plan for even a year, think about if that person was given the opportunity, for example, for a deferral And that deferral was based on the fact that they could begin to make their payments again. Okay, that was the rule that we had. If we gave somebody a forbearance, they were in a position where they, in order to be able to defer that, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac said, yes, you can do a deferral. You can tack that money on to the end of the loan at no additional interest. But the key to that was being able to resume making their additional payments. Well, guess what? If you were the person behind the, the door to the bank, and you had to advance those funds for even just a year for taxes and insurance, okay? You wanted to be very careful if you were doing modifications or forbearances going forward, especially into 2026. And so it's important that you understand that the rules, they are changing. And unfortunately, we now are very fortunate if we happen to be a banking institution where we can make that decision to give someone, for example, a potential forbearance or a modification that is exemplary of that relationship with that buyer, that borrower. It's really important to understand that right now, literally right now, from a modification perspective, that decision is pretty much in the hands of the business unit that we're talking about. And that's easy if you're a bank and it's your own customer, or if it is a credit union. But if that loan, for example, is in a mortgage-backed security, a Fannie or Freddie, or even in a Ginnie security, we have to be very careful. And one of the things that I hope we'll be talking about even more in our hotlines to follow are and educational opportunities is to help you to understand what those rules are once they're set. We're still very much, for example, FHA has just now put out, literally in December, a new document that shows what you can and can't do on to modify a loan that is, for example, an FHA insured loan that might be in a mortgage-backed security, in a global mortgage-backed security. So that's very important. And what we want to try to do in these classes and in these opportunities to come together as often as you'd like. We are obviously committed to our hotline once a month, but the circumstances are that you'll always have that email address that you could send a question in, and we would try to resolve that and get back to you on it in terms of your particular institution. This is not just for people using Vertex today, but people using other systems and having an opportunity to just be educated, if you will, a little bit. It's my word, educated. A little bit more on what's going on out there. Brian and I try very hard from an operational perspective to stay on top of that. So we're very happy to do that. But that particular one, in terms of COVID and the FHA modification options, as I mentioned, and I apologize, but if you go on to the FHA website, you will see that there was literally just brandy new, came out within the week. Okay.
Pat, I think the other thing we should tie into this is that making sure everybody is aware how the escrow analysis can affect that borrower and push that borrower into a default situation. So, again, it's one of those things that you have to be really cognizant and pay attention to, because if you're with a lender that maybe doesn't follow GSE standards because it's your own portfolio, and you say, oh, well, they have a major shortage and a deficiency, and we're going to only spread this out 12 months, that could be the straw that broke the camel's back and force them into a delinquency situation. Then you have a whole nother issue where you have to start talking loss mitigation and those kind of things. So I just wanted to kind of circle this around and tie this into that as well, because it's something that can't be ignored and should be addressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that takes us to full time. And so I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, submitting the questions. And essentially, if you found this session helpful, please share this link and YouTube channel with colleagues and people at your institution who might benefit from these insights. And if you joined late, don't worry, the recordings will be available on YouTube immediately after we finish. And so thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you next month. Have a great day.